Her hands weren't supposed to be inside a living chest. The hospital cleaner in blue scrubs and latex gloves had one job: keep the floors spotless, invisible. But when the monitor flatlined and the mafia patriarch's mother coded, every doctor in the ICU froze. And Adira Walker reached into the open incision and compressed the aorta with her bare fingers. Adira Walker was, on every official document, an environmental services technician, a cleaner. But for 37 seconds, with the matriarch's life bleeding out, she was the only cardiothoracic surgeon in the room. And the man watching from the doorway, the man who owned the hospital and half the city's underworld, now had one burning question: who was the woman he paid minimum wage to mop his floors? For 6 months, Adira Walker's world was a 14-floor vertical kingdom of bleach, wax, and silence. Her shift started at 10 p.m., when the halls of St. Michael's Memorial emptied of visitors and the real work began. Her cart was her command post: microfiber cloths, a spray bottle of disinfectant-coated Virex Plus, a mop bucket with wheels that squeaked on the linoleum. She knew which rooms housed post-op patients who needed quiet, which nurses were kind, and which surgeons left arrogance like a trail of confetti in their wake. She was 34, from Freetown by way of a student visa a decade ago, and she spoke only when spoken to. The other cleaners called her the Ghost, not because she was scary, but because she moved through the hospital leaving no trace but shine. Victor Rossi did not believe in ghosts. He believed in ledgers, in loyalty, and in the 312 beds of the hospital that bore his mother's maiden name on the donor plaque. The Rossi family's transition from outright crime to legitimate enterprise was a New York legend, but intensive care units have a way of making legends feel very small. His mother, Sophia, 78, had a heart that was a masterpiece of faulty engineering: aortic stenosis. The valve was closing like a rusted gate. The surgery to replace it was routine. The chief of cardiothoracic surgery had assured him. Victor had paid for a new surgical wing. Routine was the least he expected. The operation began at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. In the operating room, it was a ballet of precision. In the corridors Adira would clean 12 hours later, it was just another scheduled procedure. But in the space between heartbeats, a calcified fragment broke loose. It became a bullet in Sophia's bloodstream, shooting into a smaller artery and starving a section of her heart muscle. On the table, her blood pressure plummeted. They stabilized her, closed her up, moved her to the CVICU, the Cardiac Vascular Intensive Care Unit. Room 402, the room with the view of the river, reserved for patients whose families had made certain donations. Adira knew none of this. Her knowledge of room 402 was that the baseboards were scuffed from bed moves and the window was hard to streak-free. That night she emptied the trash, wiped every surface with broad, efficient arcs, and mopped the floor in overlapping figure eights. Sophia Rossi slept, a network of tubes and wires tethering her to a symphony of machines. Adira checked the Sharps container, noted it was half full. Her eyes flicked to the monitor. Vital signs were displayed in glowing green numbers. Blood pressure 110/70, heart rate 82, oxygen saturation 97%, normal, stable. She pushed her cart out, the door sighing shut behind her. The flatline alarm sounded at 2:17 a.m. It wasn't a gentle beep. It was a single, sustained, piercing tone that severed the quiet of the unit. Nurses rushed from the station. The resident on call, Dr. Anish Patel, 28 and 8 hours into a 24-hour shift, got there first. Sophia's blood pressure was crashing, 60/40, then 50 palpable. A nurse called a code blue. The room filled with people. A crash cart was wheeled in, its drawers rattling with adrenaline amiodarone paddles. They started compressions. They shocked her once, twice. The waveform on the monitor jittered, then flatlined again. Dr. Patel called for an emergent return to the OR. The surgical team was scrambling, but the attending surgeon was 20 minutes away. The resident knew the protocol. If it's a post-op tamponade where blood fills the sac around the heart and strangles it, you have to open the chest right there. In the room, he had read about it. He had never done it. His hands hovered over the sterile instrument kit. The clock was ticking. Brain death begins in 4 to 6 minutes. Adira was in the utility closet refilling her mop bucket when the code echoed down the hall. Codes were not her business. Her protocol was to stay clear to become part of the wall, but the panic in the voices was different. She heard the resident say, "I can't find the bleeder." She heard a nurse say, "We're losing her." Something in the cadence of their fear. It was the sound of people watching a process they couldn't control. She left the bucket. She walked to the doorway of 402. The scene was chaos held together by training. The resident had a scalpel. He had made the incision, reopening the sternum. A retractor was holding the ribs apart. And there was Sophia Rossi's heart, exposed and motionless in a pool of blood. It wasn't beating, it was drowning. The resident was suctioning frantically, but the blood welled up too fast. He was looking for a source he couldn't see. The pressure was too high. Every second, the chance of bringing her back slipped away. Adira's feet moved before her mind could protest. She stepped into the room. "It's the aortic suture line," she said, her voice quiet but clear. No one heard her over the alarm. She took another step. "You have a dehiscence. The pressure blew a stitch. You need to cross-clamp above the repair." Dr. Patel turned, his eyes wide above his mask. "Who are you? Get out." A nurse tried to block her path. Adira didn't push. She looked past him at the heart. She saw the precise location where the bright pulsing jet of blood was coming from, not from a coronary vessel, from the ascending aorta, a technical failure. "Your clamp," she said, pointing to an instrument on the tray. "Now, or she dies in 90 seconds. The resident froze. The charge nurse, a woman named Linda with 30 years of experience, looked from the resident's paralyzed hands to Adira's steady, gloved ones, the same gloves she used to clean bedpans. Linda made a decision. She thrust the vascular clamp into Adira's hand. What happened next lasted 37 seconds. Adira's left hand reached into the incision. She used her fingers to gently lift the heart just enough. Her right hand guided the clamp. She didn't look at the resident, she looked at the anatomy. The jaw of the clamp closed, millimeters from the delicate coronary artery. The jet of blood stopped. "Suction," she said. The nurse suctioned. The field cleared. "Now you can see it," Adira said. 2 interrupted proline sutures, right there." She stepped back. Her role was over. The resident, now seeing the precise problem, took over. He repaired the leak. They restarted the heart with a single shock. The flatline dissolved into a slow, then steady rhythm. Victor Rossi arrived 10 minutes later, summoned from the family lounge. He saw his mother alive, surrounded by machines and relieved staff. And he saw a woman in blue scrubs at the edge of the room, wiping her bloody gloves on a clean towel from her cart, her face a mask of profound resignation. He asked the charge nurse what had happened. The nurse said, "She saved her, the cleaner." The word hung in the antiseptic air. Cleaner. Victor Rossi looked at Adira. He saw the calm. He saw the specific economic way she moved even now. This was not luck. This was not a bystander who'd seen a TV show. This was muscle memory of the highest order. He did not thank her. He asked her name. She gave it, Adira Walker. He told her to wait in the administrative office on the first floor. He told her not to speak to anyone. It wasn't a request. It was an order from a man accustomed to being obeyed. While his mother stabilized, Victor Rossi made 2 calls. The first was to his consigliere to delay a meeting about a waterfront development. The second was to a private investigator he kept on retainer for due diligence on business partners. The directive was simple and urgent. "I want everything on an employee named Adira Walker, Environmental Services. I want to know where she came from, what she did before this, and why a woman who can perform open-heart surgery in a crisis is cleaning up other people's messes for $17 an hour. Find the gap in her story. I want it before sunrise." Downstairs, Adira sat in a stiff leather chair, staring at a painting of sailboats on a calm sea. She knew what was coming. The question, the disbelief, the accusation. She had broken the most fundamental rule of her survival: remain invisible. She thought of her daughter Maya asleep in their apartment in Queens. She thought of the careful, quiet life she had built brick by brick over 10 years. And she knew, with a cold certainty, that it was all about to unravel because for 37 seconds, she had remembered who she used to be. By 4 a.m., the investigator's preliminary report landed in Victor's inbox. It was sparse. Nigerian citizen, permanent resident, work history, hotel housekeeping, office cleaning, then St. Michael's. No medical licenses on file in any state. No record from any U.S. nursing or medical school. But there was a flag. Her visa, a decade ago, was a J1, a visa for exchange visitors. The listed sponsoring institution was not a hotel or a cleaning agency. It was the University College Hospital in Ibadan, Nigeria, one of the largest teaching hospitals in West Africa. The field of study on the old immigration form was blank, redacted, or missing. Victor Rossi read that line again. A hospital cleaner with a missing medical past, a mother clinging to life because of her, and a J1 visa that suggested a story no one was telling. He closed the laptop. The investigator would dig deeper, but Victor understood people. He understood that secrets are currency, and Adira Walker had just spent all of hers in one blinding public moment. He walked to the office where she waited. He had the advantage. He had the resources. And he had a new, vital interest in the woman who mopped his floors. But what Victor Rossi didn't know, as he turned the handle to the office door, was that Adira Walker's secret wasn't just hers to keep. It was a landmine, and his investigation was the first step onto the field. The office door closed with a soft click, sealing Adira Walker and Victor Rossi in a silence thicker than the hospital walls. He did not sit behind the desk. He stood, studying her as if she were a blueprint with a critical, hidden flaw. "Tell me," he said, his voice low, devoid of the threat she expected. It was worse. It was curiosity. A cleaner does not do what you did, so what are you? Adira kept her eyes on the sailboat painting. "I am what my paycheck says I am, Mr. Rossi. My mother's heart was in your hands. Your paycheck says you clean toilets. We both know that's a lie. The University College Hospital in Ibadan, a J1 visa. What were you exchanging?" Her composure, the shield she had polished for years, did not crack, but inside, a wire snapped. He knew about Ibadan. Of course he did. Men like him could know anything by sunrise. "It was a long time ago," she said. "Not long enough to forget how to cross-clamp in Yorta. You didn't learn that from a textbook. You learned it from repetition, from doing it over and over, on living people." He took a step closer. "I have a team looking into you right now. They will find out. I am giving you a chance to tell me first. Why is someone with your skills hiding?" The word hiding landed like a physical blow. For a decade, she had called it surviving, building a quiet life, providing stability for Maya. Hiding was what you did from a monster. Was she hiding? She looked at him then. "If I saved your mother's life, why does it matter?" "It matters," Victor said, "because competence that deep doesn't just vanish. It gets buried. And things buried are usually buried for a reason. I need to know if that reason is a danger to my family or to this hospital." He paused. "Or to you." It was the last part, asterisk, or to you, asterisk, that undid her. It was an acknowledgement of her humanity, a crack in the armor of his power. She took a breath. The story was a vault she had sworn never to open, but the lock was broken now. "I was a surgeon," she said. The words felt foreign on her tongue. "In Nigeria, a cardiothoracic fellow at UCH Ibadan." Victor said nothing. He simply waited. "I was 12 months from finishing my fellowship. My mentor was Professor Alabi. He was a giant. He believed medicine was a sacred craft. He also believed in old-world hierarchies. The consultant is king. The fellow is a servant. The patient is a subject." She wrapped her arms around herself. "There was a child, a boy of 8 with a congenital defect, a VSD, a hole between the ventricles. The repair was scheduled. Professor Alabi was to perform it. But that morning he was called to a private clinic to operate on a government minister. He left me in charge. A straightforward closure," he said. You have observed me do it 20 times. Do not disappoint me." She could still smell the antiseptic, see the small body on the table. The repair was not straightforward. The tissue was friable like wet paper. The standard sutures tore through. I had to improvise a patch from pericardium. I was slow, too slow. The boy went into arrest on the bypass machine. We got him back, but he had an anoxic brain injury. He never woke up. Victor's expression was unreadable. A tragic complication. It happens. It happens, Adira echoed, a bitter taste in her mouth. But in Professor Alabi's theater, complications are not accidents. They are failures, and failures have authors. When he returned, he was furious, not at the loss of the child, but at the insult to his reputation. A fellow had operated without him, and failed. The story he crafted was not of a difficult case, but of arrogance, of an overambitious female surgeon who disobeyed orders and killed a patient. The official inquiry was a formality. Professor Alabi's word was law. Adira was censured. Her fellowship was terminated. Her medical license was suspended pending a full review, a review that would never come because the case file mysteriously went missing. The boy's family, poor and grieving, was quietly compensated by the hospital. Their silence was purchased. Her career was erased. "I had a student visa for an exchange program that was ending," she continued, her voice flat. "I had no license, no future in Nigeria. The shame, it wasn't just professional. It was in my mother's eyes when the neighbors whispered. I used the last of my money to change my visa status to stay in America. I needed to disappear, to do work where no one would ask questions, where no one would look at my hands and wonder what they had done." Victor processed this. A fall from grace, a narrative of failure. It was a common story in its way, but it didn't fit. "You acted with more confidence in that I see you than any scared, disgraced doctor I've ever seen. You didn't hesitate." "I hesitated for 10 years, Adira said, and for the first time emotion cracked through. Every night. But in that moment, it wasn't about being a surgeon. It was about seeing a problem I could fix. The muscle memory, it's still there, like a song you can't forget." He believed her tragedy. But Victor Rossi's instinct for incomplete stories was sharper than any scalpel. Her tale was clean, neat, a perfect cautionary fable. Life was rarely that neat. "Wait here," he said. He left the office, pulling out his phone. In the hallway, he called his investigator. "I need more than databases. I need people. Find someone from that hospital in Ibadan. A nurse, a technician, another doctor who was there 10 years ago. I want to know about the boy, about Professor Alabi, and I want to know what isn't in the official record." Back in his mother's suite, as dawn tinged the sky gray, Victor watched Sophia sleep. The beep of the monitor was a steady, reassuring metronome. His mother, who had survived the streets of Naples, a mob war, and his father's temper, had been brought to the edge by a tiny piece of calcium and saved by a woman with a ghost in her past. The symmetry was not lost on him. Meanwhile, across the city, the investigation shifted gears. The digital trail had hit a wall. The paper trail in Nigeria was a labyrinth of lost files and bureaucratic silence. So the investigator turned to human intelligence. It took 36 hours and a significant wire transfer to a former hospital administrator in Lagos, but a name surfaced: Dr. Femi Akanjo, a retired anesthesiologist who had worked at UCH Ibadan for 40 years. He was old, he was talkative, and he remembered the scandal. A call was arranged. Victor listened on speakerphone in his study. Dr. Akanjo's voice was thin, crackling with distance. "Ah, the Adira Walker case. Yes, yes. A terrible business. A brilliant young woman. Such hands. Professor Alabi, he was a jealous man. He saw her talent as a threat to his own legacy." "The boy who died," Victor pressed. "What really happened?" A long sigh traveled across the ocean. "The child, little Kofi. His tissue was a known problem, sickle cell related, very fragile. Professor Alabi knew this. He had operated on the boy's older sister the year before. Same issue. He nearly lost her on the table. That is why I believe he found an excuse to be elsewhere that day. He let the fellow take the risk. If she succeeded, he took the credit. If she failed, well, she did. Victor's blood went cold. Are you saying he set her up to fail? I am saying he placed a gifted surgeon in an impossible situation with a patient he knew was high risk, and then he sacrificed her to preserve his own reputation when it went wrong. The inquiry was a sham. The missing file, it was not missing. Alabi had it destroyed. He told the review board she had operated against direct orders, that she had used experimental technique. It was all lies, but who would believe a disgraced fellow over the great professor? The pieces clicked into a different, darker picture. It wasn't a tragedy of arrogance. It was a calculated assassination of a career. Adira hadn't failed. She had been sabotaged. Why didn't she fight? Victor asked. Fight with what? Dr. Akanjo replied, a note of profound sadness in his voice. No money, no powerful family, and Alabi had connections to the medical board, to the politicians. To fight was to be crushed completely. To disappear was to survive. Many of us knew the truth. We said nothing. We too were afraid. So we lost a brilliant surgeon to the pride of a small man. I have thought of her often. I am glad she is alive. Victor ended the call. The anger he felt was a cold, pure thing. He understood predatory systems. He had built his fortune navigating them. This was no different. Adira Walker wasn't hiding from her failure. She was in exile from an injustice. At the same time, a different storm was brewing at St. Michael's. The hospital administration had awakened to the incident. A cleaner performing an invasive surgical procedure was a catastrophic liability nightmare. The head of risk management, the chief medical officer, and the hospital's legal counsel were in emergency session. Their primary concern was not Sophia Rossi's life, but the hospital's survival. If this got out, the lawsuits, the media, the state medical board investigations would be endless. They summoned Adira. It was not an invitation. 2 security guards escorted her to the same administrative office. This time, 3 suits sat across from her. The tone was not curious. It was prosecutorial. Ms. Walker, the chief medical officer began, your actions, while seemingly heroic, constitute the unlicensed practice of medicine, a felony. You violated hospital protocol, state law, and put this institution at immense risk. Adira said nothing. She had expected this. The legal counsel slid a document across the table. This is a confidentiality and release agreement. You agree that you acted outside your training and authority, that the hospital is not liable for any repercussions, and that you will not speak of this incident to anyone. In return, you will be terminated with 3 months severance pay, and we will not report you to the state medical board or immigration authorities. It was a generous offer from their perspective. They were buying her silence and her disappearance. Signing it would be an admission of guilt for the crime of saving a life. It would also mean no job, no reference, and the constant threat of exposure held over her head. And if I don't sign, Adira asked, her voice quiet, then we will be forced to pursue all legal and disciplinary avenues available to us. You will be fired for cause, reported, and likely face deportation proceedings. We understand you have a daughter. Think of her. They had done their homework. They had found her pressure point, Maya. Adira looked at the document. The black lines swam before her eyes. This was the price of visibility. This was the system reasserting its order. The surgeon must be put back in her place, the janitor's closet, or out on the street. I need to think, she said. You have 24 hours, the legal counsel said. The offer expires at 5 p.m. tomorrow. She walked out of the hospital into the midday sun, feeling hollow. She had saved a life, and in return, her own life was being dismantled. She thought of Maya's school, their tiny apartment, the careful budget that balanced on her $17 an hour wage. 3 months, severance would not last. Victor Rossi learned of the hospital's ultimatum within the hour. His source was the charge nurse, Linda, who was loyal to patient care, not to administrators. He saw their move for what it was, a cowardly cover-up. They were willing to throw the woman who saved his mother under the bus to protect their own backs, and they were using her child as leverage. A fierce, protective rage ignited in him. The Rosses had a code. You protected those who were loyal. Adira had been loyal to her oath, to the patient, in a way the hospital itself had not. She was now his responsibility. He sent a car for her. It brought her not to the hospital but to a discreet, high-end hotel near Central Park. A suite was waiting. So was Victor, along with a woman in a severe suit, his personal attorney, Elena Morty. "Sit," Victor said. Adira did, wary. "The hospital is trying to silence you. They're threatening your daughter. I will not allow this." Elena opened a briefcase. "Ms. Walker, we have a proposal. Mr. Rossi is prepared to offer you a position as a private, live-in caregiver for his mother during her recovery. The salary is 5 times what you earned at St. Michael's. It includes full health benefits for you and your daughter and legal immigration support. In return, you sign an employment contract with us, not a gag order with them." Adira stared, stunned. Why would you do this?" Victor met her gaze. "Because you were wronged. First in Nigeria, now here. Because you saved my mother when no one else could. And because," he said, a hint of his old-world ruthlessness returning, "the hospital needs to understand they cannot threaten what is mine." It was a lifeline, but it was also a gilded cage. She would be trading one form of dependence for another, deeper one. She would be bound to the Rossi family, to their world, to their secrets. "What about the medical board, the unlicensed practice?" Elena smiled thinly. "We have a team of attorneys who specialize in making problems disappear. The hospital does not want this public any more than we do. We will negotiate a standstill. You will not practice surgery, but as a privately employed caregiver performing delegated tasks under a physician's indirect supervision. The lines are flexible. Your past in Nigeria, with the new testimony we are gathering from Dr. Akanjo, can be reframed. We can potentially petition for a review of your case, even reinstatement of your credentials, in time." It was too much, too fast. A path out of the darkness she had lived in for a decade, offered by a man whose wealth was built on shadows. "I need to think," she said again, the only phrase that felt true. "You have until tomorrow at 4, Victor said, 1 hour before their deadline expires." Adira spent the night in the hotel suite, staring at the city lights. She called her sister in Maryland, who begged her to take the deal. For Maya, Adira, think of her future. She thought of Professor Alabi, his triumphant lie. She thought of the cold faces of the hospital administrators. Then she thought of Sophia Rossi's heart, steady under her fingers. The right thing had felt clear in that moment. Now, every choice was tangled in threat and obligation. The next day at 3:45 p.m. she met Victor in the suite. "I'll take the job," she said, "on 2 conditions. My daughter lives with me, and I answer to your mother's needs, not to your other business." Victor nodded. "Agreed." He handed her a phone. "Call the hospital lawyer. Tell them you declined their offer and that all future communication should go through attorney Morty." Adira made the call. The lawyer on the other end sputtered, threatened again with deportation. Adira simply said, "My legal counsel will be in touch," and hung up. The feeling was terrifying and electrifying. For the first time in 10 years, she was not alone. But as Elena Morty began the fierce counter-negotiation with the hospital, a new front opened. The story had leaked. A tabloid journalist, tipped off by a disgruntled orderly who had seen part of the Code Blue chaos, published a sensational piece online. "Mafia Mommy saved BY janitor surgeon." The details were wrong, the tone was lurid, but the core facts were there. A Rossi family matriarch, a life-saving procedure, a hospital cleaner with a mysterious past. The hospital board panicked. The state medical board, now unable to ignore the public story, announced a preliminary inquiry. Reporters camped outside St. Michael's. They found Adira's apartment building in Queens. A camera crew filmed Maya walking to school. Victor's world and Adira's were now forcibly colliding in the public eye. The carefully managed containment was shattered. The hospital, to save itself, was preparing a narrative of their own, that of a reckless, unqualified immigrant who endangered a patient, and of a hospital system that was victimized by her deception. They were preparing to throw her to the wolves, and they had the media megaphone. Victor Rossi stood at the window of his penthouse, watching the news vans swarm like ants. His protectiveness towards Adira hardened into something else, a battle stance. This was no longer just about repayment or justice. It was a war of perception, and he had the resources to fight it. But to win, he would have to do the one thing Adira feared most: drag her past and the truth about Professor Alabi into the blinding light of day. He would have to make her a public figure, a cause, a symbol. He turned to Alina. Get Dr. Akanjo on a plane to New York and draft a statement. We're not hiding anymore. We're going to tell them exactly who she is. Dr. Femi Akanjo arrived at JFK on a Thursday, a slight man in a worn suit, carrying a battered leather case containing 40 years of medical journals and one man's burden of guilt. Victor Rossi's team escorted him to a secure conference room in a midtown law firm. Cameras were set up. Alina Morty had drafted a statement, but Dr. Akanjo waved it away. I will tell the truth, he said. That is all I have come to do. The press conference was not held in a grand ballroom, but streamed live from that quiet room. Alina introduced him as a retired chief of anesthesiology from University College Hospital, Ibadan. Then Dr. Akanjo began to speak. He did not talk about Adira Walker at first. He talked about the culture of fear in a system where one man could be a god. He described Professor Alabi's brilliance and his tyranny. He detailed the case of the child, Kofi, whose medical history was known to be perilous. And then, softly, he laid out the conspiracy, the deliberate absence, the calculated risk placed on a fellow's shoulders, the falsified reports, the destroyed file, the purchased silence of a grieving family. Adira Walker did not fail that child, he said, looking directly into the camera, his voice trembling with age but firm with conviction. The system failed her. We failed her. I failed her by staying silent. She was one of the most gifted technical surgeons I have ever worked with. Her exile is a medical crime, and her actions here in your hospital are not the actions of a fraud. They are the muscle memory of a healer who was unjustly buried alive. The effect was seismic. The tabloid narrative of mafia janitor splintered. Serious news outlets picked up the story. The phrase "wronged surgeon" began to trend. A producer from a major network's investigative unit called Alina, a medical ethics professor from Columbia, wrote an op-ed. The public sympathy shifted, powerfully and suddenly, towards Adira. The hospital board was caught flat-footed. Their strategy of painting Adira as a dangerous imposter was now collapsing. In an emergency meeting, the chief legal counsel argued for a settlement. We look like monsters attacking a victim of a prior injustice. We need to make this go away quietly. But not everyone agreed. The chief of surgery, a man named Dr. Philip Graves, saw a different threat. His concern wasn't just liability, it was precedent. If a cleaner could be vindicated for practicing surgery, it undermined the entire hierarchy of the hospital, the sacred wall of credentials that defined their authority. He made a call to an old friend on the state medical board. The message was clear. The principle of licensure was under assault. The board needed to assert its authority, regardless of the sympathetic backstory. The medical board's inquiry, initially a formality, hardened into an inquisition. They summoned Adira. The hearing room was paneled in dark wood. 5 board members, all physicians, sat elevated behind a bench. Their questions were not about the night in the ICU, they were about Nigeria. Why was her license revoked? Did she accept the findings of the inquiry? Did she believe she was above the rules? They treated Dr. Akanjo's testimony as the biased account of a nostalgic old man. Then they played their card. The hospital's legal team presented a new document, a signed affidavit from a former nursing assistant at UCH Ibadan, stating that Adira had a temperamental arrogance and often disregarded protocol. The affidavit was recent, notarized in Lagos. The assistant had been paid a significant sum, a fact not disclosed. It was a character assassination, thin but damaging. Adira, sitting beside Alina, felt the walls closing in again. The same playbook from a decade ago was being used an ocean away. Buy a lie, sell the truth. Victor Rossi watched the hearing via a secure video feed. His anger was a cold fire. He called his investigator. Find the nursing assistant. I want to know the transaction. And I want to know everything about Dr. Philip Graves. His finances, his relationships, his weaknesses. While that investigation churned, a more immediate problem erupted. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, tipped off by an anonymous source about an immigrant practicing medicine without a license, opened a file on Adira. A notice appeared in her mailbox, a request to appear for an interview to review her permanent resident status. The threat of deportation, which the hospital had wielded, was now a formal government action. Maya came home from school crying. A classmate had said her mother was going to be sent back to Africa. Adira held her daughter, her own fear threatening to swallow her. She had agreed to Victor's protection to avoid this exact moment. Now, the storm was inside her home. Victor's response was swift and brutal. He didn't just hire an immigration attorney. He retained a former Undersecretary of Homeland Security as a consultant. He also directed his media team to amplify Dr. Akanjo's story, framing the ICE inquiry as a persecution of a whistleblower, a narrative that found fertile ground in the political climate. Pressure began to build on the local ICE office from advocacy groups and sympathetic politicians. But the medical board was a harder target. They were insulated, judicial. Their ruling would be based on narrow legal definitions of licensure and practice. Victor needed leverage. His investigator delivered it 48 hours later. Dr. Philip Graves, the chief of surgery, had a secret. Not a crime, but a vulnerability. His son was a second-year medical student at an elite school, admitted under questionable circumstances after a large, anonymous donation to the school's building fund was traced to a shell company owned by Graves's brother-in-law. It was a quiet act of nepotism, an ethical breach that would destroy his son's career and his own reputation if exposed. Victor didn't threaten. He didn't need to. Alina Morty requested a private meeting with Dr. Graves. She didn't mention his son. She simply laid out the Rossi family's commitment to seeing Adira Walker's name cleared and their frustration with the board's adversarial approach. She mentioned, casually, that they were preparing a large charitable donation to support foreign-trained physicians seeking credential reviews, and they would be seeking a spokesperson of impeccable ethical standing. The subtext was clear: stand down, or we will expose the flaw in your own standing. The next day, the tone of the medical board's questioning shifted. The aggressive hostility softened. They began to ask about the specifics of the emergency, focusing on the life-or-death necessity. They accepted into evidence a sworn statement from charge nurse Linda detailing the resident's paralysis and the immediate threat of death. The affidavit from the Nigerian nursing assistant was dismissed as irrelevant hearsay. It appeared the crisis was turning. Public opinion was firmly with Adira. The hospital was talking settlement. The medical board seemed to be leaning toward a non-punitive resolution, perhaps a censure for the hospital's protocol failures rather than action against Adira. Victor allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. He was winning. Then the email arrived. It was sent to Victor's private address, an address known to very few. The subject line was blank. The body contained only a link to a secure file-sharing server and a password. There was no message, no threat, no signature. Victor's head of security accessed the link. The file contained scanned documents, old documents. The letterhead was from the Nigerian Medical and Dental Council. They were the official, finalized reports from the inquiry into the death of Kofi, the 8-year-old boy. The very files Dr. Akanjo claimed Professor Alabi had destroyed. But these were not the exonerating documents Victor expected. According to these stamped, signed, and sealed reports, the inquiry had cleared Professor Alabi of any wrongdoing. It found that Dr. Adira Walker had indeed acted against direct orders, had used an unauthorized surgical technique, and was solely responsible for the catastrophic outcome. The conclusion was unambiguous. Her license revocation was justified. Attached was a copy of her formal revocation notice, with her photograph and signature. The documents looked devastatingly authentic, and they contradicted everything Dr. Akanjo had said. If these were released, Adira's sympathetic story would evaporate. She would be exposed not as a wronged hero, but as a liar who had fabricated her persecution. Dr. Akanjo would be seen as a co-conspirator in the lie. The medical board would come down on her with the full force of the law. ICE would have grounds for deportation. The hospital would sue her for fraud. Victor stared at the screen. This was not the hospital's work. They didn't have this reach. This was someone with deep connections in Nigeria's medical establishment. Someone who had kept these documents safe for a decade, waiting. Someone who was now watching from the shadows and had just shown their hand. Professor Alabi. He was not a retired, forgotten figure. He was a man with a legacy to protect, a legacy that Adira's redemption story was threatening to stain. He had fought to destroy her once. He would not hesitate to do it again from 7,000 miles away. Victor called his investigator. I need everything on Professor Ebenezer Alabi, where he is, what he's doing, who he knows, and I need to know if those documents are real or forgeries. The investigator's preliminary report came back fast. Professor Alabi was now the director of a prestigious private cardiac hospital in Lagos. He sat on the National Medical Council. He was politically connected, wealthy, and famously litigious. He had a reputation for crushing anyone who challenged his version of events. The documents, according to a forensic document analyst, showed no signs of digital tampering. The paper, the ink, the stamps, they were consistent with official documents from that period. They could still be forgeries, but expert, expensive ones. Victor was left with a terrible choice. He could confront Adira with the documents, see if her story changed. But that would betray the trust he was trying to build. He could ignore them, but that left a timed bomb in the hands of a ruthless adversary. Or he could go on the offensive, trying to disprove their authenticity, a nearly impossible task from another continent. He chose a fourth option. He had Alina draft a letter, not to Alabi, but to the current chairman of the Nigerian Medical and Dental Council. The letter was a formal request, on behalf of Ms. Walker, for a complete copy of her sealed disciplinary file, citing her right to review under data protection laws. It was a bureaucratic gambit. If the official council sent the same damning documents, the game was over. If they sent different ones, or claimed the file was missing, it would expose Alabi's version as a fraud. The wait was agonizing. Days passed. The medical board hearing was reconvening for a final decision in 72 hours. The press was circling, sensing a climax. Adira, now living in a guarded apartment Victor provided, was a knot of anxiety. She could feel Victor holding something back, see the new tension in his eyes. Finally, she confronted him. "What aren't you telling me?" He showed her the documents from the email. Adira's face went ashen. She read the familiar lies, the official seal giving them power. A sob escaped her, not of sadness, but of rage. He kept them, all this time. He kept the proof of his lie. "Are they real?" Victor asked gently. "The signatures are real. The council's stamp is real. The facts inside are poison. This is what he does. He uses the truth of the paper to sell the lie of what happened." She looked up, her eyes blazing. "He wins again. Unless..." "Unless what?" "Unless we have the one thing he cannot fake." She stood up, packing. The family, Kofi's family, they were paid to be silent, but silence is not the same as belief. If they would speak, If they would say they were pressured, that they never believed I was at fault. It was a desperate hope, finding a poor family in a Lagos suburb a decade later who had taken a payoff, and convincing them to speak against a powerful man like Alabi. The odds were minuscule, but it was the only move left. Victor dispatched his most trusted investigator to Lagos with a simple directive: find the family. Offer them not money for their story, but security. A new start, education for their other children, protection from Alabi's retaliation. A trade, truth for a future. As the investigator boarded the flight, the medical board reconvened. They would render their decision without knowing about the Nigerian documents or the desperate search for a family's testimony. The hearing room was packed. Adira sat, her hand in Maya's, who Victor had arranged to be there. Dr. Akanjo sat behind her. Victor watched from the back. The chairman of the board cleared his throat. This panel has reached its determination regarding the actions of Adira Walker in the early hours of September 12th. But just as he began to speak, Alina Morty's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, her eyes widening. It was an email from the Nigerian Medical and Dental Council, their response. She opened it, scanning the text quickly. Then she stood up. "Mr. Chairman, I beg the court's indulgence for one moment. We have just received critical new information from the official medical authority in Nigeria that directly pertains to this case." The room erupted in murmurs. The chairman banged his gavel. "This is highly irregular." "It is paramount," Alina insisted, holding up her phone. "The official counsel has written to state that the file pertaining to Dr. Walker's disciplinary case cannot be located in their archives. It is listed as missing. They have no record of sending the documents that have recently circulated. They are, for all official purposes, unable to verify their authenticity." A stunned silence fell. The board members looked at each other. The hospital's lawyers looked panicked. The damning documents from Professor Alabi were now officially ghosts, unverifiable, possibly forged. Victor let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Alabi had overplayed his hand. His attempt to use the system's authority had been met with the system's bureaucracy. The file was missing, just as Dr. Akanjo said it would be. The board chairman adjourned the hearing for 1 hour to review the new information. In the hallway chaos, reporters shouted questions. Victor pulled Adira and Alina aside. "This is a reprieve, not an acquittal. Alabi will try something else. We need that family." At that moment, Victor's phone rang. It was the investigator in Lagos. His voice was crackly but clear. "I found them. The mother, she is afraid, but she is also angry. The money is gone. The promise of a better life was a lie. She will talk, but she needs to be on a plane out of the country with her 2 remaining children before she says a word." "Get it done," Victor said, "whatever it takes." Back in the hearing room, the board returned. The chairman spoke. "Given the extraordinary circumstances, the unresolved questions regarding the petitioner's past credentials, and the unambiguous life-saving nature of her actions in a moment of absolute necessity, this board finds that the most egregious fault lies with the hospital for a failure of protocol and supervision. No disciplinary action is recommended against Ms. Walker. The matter of her foreign licensure is outside our jurisdiction. This case is closed." It was a victory, a narrow, technical, but monumental victory. Adira would not be punished. She was free. The room burst into noise. Maya hugged her mother, crying. Dr. Akanjo wept quietly. Victor allowed himself a small, tight smile. But as they walked out of the building into a scrum of flashing cameras, Victor knew the real battle was just beginning. The hospital would appeal. The immigration case was still open, and Professor Alabi, humiliated and exposed, was now a declared enemy with nothing left to lose. The family was coming, but their testimony would be another grenade thrown into the public arena. Adira's safety, her future, her very identity, would have to be fought for in the open, with every past wound about to be torn wide for the world to see. The quiet war in the shadows was over. The loud, brutal, public war for Adira Walker's life was now. Kofi's mother arrived in New York on a rainy Tuesday, a small woman named Chinier who held her surviving children's hands as if the world were made of wind. Victor's team had moved them from Lagos to Accra to Brussels, a circuitous route to avoid Professor Alabi's reach. They were settled in a safe house in New Jersey, where Chinier sat with Alina Morty and an interpreter, her story pouring out in a quiet, relentless stream. Confirmed everything: the payoff, the pressure to stay silent, the lies told about Adira, but she added a devastating new layer. After the surgery, when her son was brain dead but still on life support, Professor Alabi had visited her. He told her that Adira had been experimenting, that she had used a new, untested technique against his orders. He said if she spoke against the hospital, they would take away the money and she would have nothing to bury her son with. And then he said something else. He said, "This is why women should not be surgeons. Their emotions make them reckless." Chinier remembered every word. She had buried them with her son. Alina knew this testimony was a nuclear option. It turned a medical cover-up into a story of gender-based sabotage and exploitation. It gave context to the Chinese letter of exile. They would use it, but only if Alabi struck again. He did not wait long. The day after the medical board's decision, a lengthy, defamatory interview with Professor Alabi was published in a major international newspaper. He claimed Adira was a known liar, that Dr. Akanjo was a bitter rival seeking revenge, and that the American authorities were being duped by a clever manipulator. He called for her immediate deportation and the revocation of Dr. Akanjo's pension. It was a declaration of total war. Victor saw the article and made one call: release the mother's testimony, full video, and file a libel suit against him in federal court. The video of Chinier's interview was released at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. By noon, it had gone global. The raw pain in her voice, the specific, hateful quote about women surgeons, it was undeniable. The international medical community, which had been quietly watching, erupted. Prominent female surgeons from London to Mumbai shared their own stories of systemic bias. The narrative flipped entirely. Professor Alabi was no longer a respected elder defending his legacy. He was a poster child for a poisonous, patriarchal system. The libel suit was a tactical masterpiece. By suing in U.S. court, Victor forced Alabi to either defend himself in a system where discovery rules were brutal or default and have a judgment entered against him. Alabi, arrogant, chose to fight. His lawyers demanded the case be dismissed for lack of jurisdiction. The judge, however, ruled that because the defamatory statements were published internationally and caused harm to Adira in New York, the case could proceed. The discovery process began. Alabi was forced to turn over his own records, his emails from the time. And in those emails, buried in a forgotten folder, was the truth. A message from Alabi to the hospital administrator sent the morning of Kofi's surgery. It read, "I have been called to the minister. Let the fellow handle the VSD repair. The tissue is friable, but let her learn the hard way. If she succeeds, it is my technique. If she fails, it is her arrogance. Either way, the department sees where true skill lies." It was a smoking gun, a direct admission of cynical intent. When this email was entered into the court record, the libel case became the least of Alabi's problems. The Nigerian Medical and Dental Council, under immense public and international pressure, reopened the decade-old case. Facing permanent disgrace and potential criminal charges for fraud and corruption, Professor Alabi resigned from all his positions. His private hospital saw a mass exodus of staff. His legacy was not just tarnished, it was incinerated. With Alabi neutralized, the other dominoes fell quickly. St. Michael's Hospital, seeing the tsunami of public support for Adira and the catastrophic PR disaster of fighting her, offered a settlement. It was substantial, enough to secure Maya's college education and more. In exchange, Adira agreed not to pursue further legal action against the hospital. The state medical board officially closed her case. issuing a public statement praising the heroic actions of a skilled individual in an unprecedented emergency, while gently reminding the public of the importance of licensing. It was a face-saving compromise for everyone. The immigration case evaporated. With the medical board's clearance and the public vindication, ICE quietly closed its file. Adira's green card was secure, more than secure. A congressional representative, inspired by her story, introduced a private bill to grant her a special immigrant visa for individuals of extraordinary ability, fast-tracking a path to citizenship if she chose. In the midst of this legal and public relations maelstrom, life in the Rossi penthouse had settled into a new, quiet rhythm. Sophia Rossi's recovery was slow but steady. Adira, true to her title as private caregiver, was meticulous and gentle. She monitored vitals, managed medications, and designed a rehabilitation routine that had Sophia moving from bed to chair, then taking a few halting steps with a walker. The two women rarely spoke of the storm outside. Their communication was in the practical language of care. A pillow adjusted, a blanket tucked, a hand steadied. Victor watched this transformation in his mother. The grim, pained expression she had worn for years was softening. She laughed at a television show. She asked for a specific book. She was returning, and he knew it was because of the woman who moved through the apartment with the same quiet efficiency she had used in the hospital corridors. One evening, he found Adira in the library looking at the shelves. "You can borrow any of them," he said. She turned. "I was just thinking. My grandmother used to say, a room full of books is a room full of weapons and wonders." She was a midwife. She never went to school, but she could recite medical texts from memory. "You come from a line of women who know things they weren't supposed to know," Victor said. "We had to," Adira replied. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time without the filter of fear or transaction. "You didn't have to do all of this. You got what you wanted. Your mother is alive. My debt is paid." Victor shook his head. "It was never a debt, it was a wrong. I have spent my life in a business where wrongs are settled with violence. This was a different way, a better way." He paused. "The settlement from the hospital, it's yours. You don't have to work another day in your life if you don't want to. You and Maya are taken care of." Adira knew this. The financial anxiety that had been her constant companion for a decade was gone. It was a staggering freedom. "What would I do?" she asked, not expecting an answer. "Whatever you want," Victor said, "but my mother would be heartbroken if you left." That weekend, Sophia Rossi asked Adira to join her for tea in the sunroom. The old woman sipped her espresso, her hand steadier now. "Victor tells me you are a free woman. No more courts, no more boards." "It seems that way," Adira said. "Good, then you can stop being my employee and start being my friend." Sophia put her cup down. "I have a proposal, a ridiculous one. You are a surgeon, a real one. I have money, too much of it. We start a foundation, a small clinic here in the city for people who fall through the cracks. The undocumented, the poor. You run it. You hire who you want. You treat who you want. And you get your hands back on a scalpel the right way with a license and a team and no one to tell you no." Adira was speechless. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, served to her on a china saucer. My license is being reviewed," Sophia said, a sly smile on her face. "The foundation would have a medical director. That director needs a license. My lawyers tell me that with the new evidence, the Nigerian council is prepared to issue a formal apology and reinstate your credentials. The American board will reciprocate. It will take a year, maybe two, but it will happen. In the meantime, you learn the system. You build." Tears filled Adira's eyes. This was not salvation handed down. It was a partnership offered. "Why would you do this?" "Because a woman saved my life when everyone else failed. And I have learned in my 78 years that when you find someone with that kind of strength, you do not let them go. You build something with them." Sophia reached out, her hand covering Adira's. "Build this with me." Adira said yes. The final surprise came not from the past, but from the future. At the first official planning meeting for the Sophia Rossi Memorial Clinic, Victor handed Adira a folded piece of paper. It was a real estate listing, a modest three-story building in the Bronx near a subway line. The asking price was circled. "The foundation's first acquisition," he said, "if you approve." She looked at the photo. It was perfect. Then she noticed the seller's name on the listing. It was an LLC she recognized. It was one of Victor's holding companies. He had bought the building months ago before the board's decision, before a lobby's fall. He had bought it on faith, betting on her victory. "You were that sure?" she asked. "I was that sure of you," he replied. The clinic opened 18 months later. Adira Walker, MD, stood at the door as the first patients walked in. Her medical license, newly minted by the state of New York, hung in the lobby. Dr. Femi Akanjo had come out of retirement to be her senior advisor. Charge nurse Linda ran the clinical staff. It was a full-circle redemption no one could have written. Victor and his mother attended the opening. As Adira gave a short speech, Victor watched her. She was no longer a ghost, no longer a victim, no longer a hidden secret. She was a creator, and he felt something he had not felt in a long time: peace. Later that night, back at the penthouse, Adira checked on Sophia before leaving. The old woman was asleep, her breathing even. Adira adjusted the blanket and turned to go. Victor was in the doorway. "She's doing well," Adira whispered. "Because of you," he said. They walked to the foyer together. The city glittered below them. "The clinic is a good thing. You are a good thing." Adira smiled. "We are all a mix of things, Victor. You taught me that, shadows and light." He nodded. "There's a community board meeting next week for the clinic. They want to meet the director. Are you ready?" "I've been ready for 10 years, she said. She picked up her coat. "I'll see you Tuesday for dinner. Your mother insists." "She insists on a lot of things these days," Victor said. And for the first time, Adira saw him smile fully. It changed his face. She left the penthouse, walking out into the New York night. The air was cool. She thought of her daughter waiting at home with her homework. She thought of the clinic, its lights now off but waiting for morning. She thought of her grandmother's hands, strong and capable. She had used her hands to hold a heart, to save a life, to build a future. They were the same hands, and they were finally her own. The story of the cleaner who saved the mafia prince's mother was over. The story of Dr. Adira Walker, however, was just beginning. And as the city hummed around her, she knew that this time, she would not be building it alone. So what does the story of Adira Walker leave us with? Not just a tale of one woman's redemption, but a map of the invisible walls we build between people, and what happens when someone dares to tear them down. For 10 years, a world-class surgical mind was deemed fit only to clean up biological waste, because a single, powerful man wrote a lie on an official form. Her competence didn't vanish. It was forced into exile. And it took a confluence of bizarre, high-stakes events. A mafia matriarch's failing heart, a frozen resident, and a man whose moral code was forged in a different kind of crucible, to drag that competence back into the light. We love these stories because they feel like justice. The hidden genius recognized, the villain humbled, the system corrected. But the deeper truth is more uncomfortable. For every Adira Walker who gets a second act, how many are still pushing mop buckets, driving cabs, or stocking shelves, their potential indefinitely shelved because of one mistake, one enemy, one systemic bias? The real scandal isn't that she was a cleaner. It's that the world is perfectly designed to keep a cleaner in her place, even when she holds a beating heart in her hands. Victor Rossi entered this story as an archetype, the powerful man. He left it as a partner in building a clinic. His capital and her capability forged something new. That's the other lesson. Redemption is rarely a solo journey. It's a network. It was the charge nurse who handed her the clamp, the old anesthesiologist who carried his guilt across an ocean, the mother who traded her silence for a decade, then traded her truth for a future. Even the mafia son, who saw a debt not of money, but of honor. We break systems not with individual heroism, but with unlikely alliances. The Sophia Rossi Memorial Clinic now stands in the Bronx. Its existence is a permanent question mark etched in brick and glass. It asks every patient who walks in, what are you capable of that the world has refused to see? And it asks every one of us, who have we overlooked? The janitor, the aide, the delivery person. What walls have we built in our own minds about where brilliance is allowed to reside? Adira Walker's hands are no longer just strong. They are licensed, insured, and back where they belong, healing. But the tremor of that midnight emergency, the sting of betrayal, the weight of exile, they are part of those hands too. They are what make her touch both precise and profoundly human. She didn't get her old life back. She built a new one from the fragments of the old with the help of people she never could have imagined. So the next time you walk through a hospital, a school, an office building, and you pass someone in a uniform doing what we call unskilled labor, pause just for a second. Wonder about the story you don't see, the hidden history, the silent competence. The world is full of people performing miracles in the shadows, waiting for their 37 seconds in the light. Our job is not to wait for a crisis to see them. Our job is to start looking now. If you found this journey from the darkest night in an ICU to the dawn of a clinic worthwhile, if you believe in stories that challenge what we think we know about each other, then consider subscribing. We hunt for these hidden architectures of the human experience, and we'd love for you to join us on the next one. Until then, look closer. The most extraordinary people are often the ones we've been trained to look right through.